They tell the anecdote about a rabbi and his wife, the Rebbitzin, who realized that she may be going into labor, and it was the night of Yom Kippur. So the rabbi didn't want to drive on Yom Kippur to the hospital, so he called up a car service in his neighborhood, and he said, I want to order a car to be available here, this address, at this hour, but I ask of you one thing, one condition. Don't send me a Jewish driver. Yom Kippur, the rabbi doesn't want to use a Jewish driver on Yom Kippur. Don't send me a Jewish driver. Fine. Okay, that's what you want, that's what you want. Call up the taxi, she goes into labor, it's time to go to the hospital. They get into the car, he and his wife, they're in the back of the taxi, and they hear the dispatcher ask the taxi driver, tell me, did you already pick up those anti-Semites? Ow. You just got it, okay. No worries. No worries, no worries. You're processing it, you're getting it more. On different levels, right? On different levels, yes. And I share this anecdote for obvious reasons. What is on everybody's mind today, and obviously over the last week, is the scary bloodbath and massacre that happened to our brothers and sisters in Pittsburgh in the Tree of Life. I have cousins who were bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah there, by the way. My wife's family. My wife grew up in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. I've spent many a summer there, and I'm intimately familiar with the neighborhood, the community, all of the synagogues there. I've been there too. And this has shaken up, obviously, not only the Pittsburgh community, but the entire American Jewish community, and all Jewish communities the world over. America is always and remains the Malchus Shel Chesed, the country that has been so kind to the Jewish people. We have flourished here on so many levels, and in the history of the United States of America, this has been the worst anti-Semitic attack targeting Jews. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, already his father-in-law set up Chabad and its headquarters, particularly in America, in New York. And as he said often, they found this country to be an amazing place to be able to rebuild Yiddishkeit on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean after the devastation of the Second World War, first the First World War and then the Second World War and the Holocaust. And we thought, when I grew up, we thought naively that the real bloody anti-Semitism, the stories I heard about, the stories we read in books, the stories we heard from our grandparents, that they spoke about when they were children or their parents were children in Russia or Lithuania or other parts, where one day somebody came in and just killed Jews, stabbed Jews, murdered Jews for no reason just because they were Jewish, were all a thing of the past. This belonged to primitive history before ultimately democracy and freedom and human rights have taken root. But certainly after the horrors of what people saw, what racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism can lead to, 1.5 million children sent to gas chambers, certainly the world has been transformed. And when things happen in Israel, people naively and foolishly dismiss it as an Israel thing. You know, Israel has its own rules. But the suicide bombings, September 11th, didn't happen in New York. It started all in Israel. Jews are the miners' canaries of history. Miners' canaries are very interesting. Before miners go down into their mines, they first send down canary birds to check if there are fumes. If the canary birds don't return, you know there are noxious fumes in those mines. Don't send your miners down there because they will not return alive, or they may come back very ill. The miners' canaries are the ones who sense those noxious, poisonous fumes first, and they're affected by it. And they're just warning signs for the people, for the miners, not to go into those mines. Here is the rule about history. Jews are the miners' canaries of history. Where there are noxious fumes in the world, who will be targeted first? The canaries of history, the Jews. That's the fact. only first, but not last. Yes, Stalin despised Jews, but he also killed 50 million people. Hitler hated Jews beyond what the quill can describe, but he also murdered millions and millions and millions of other innocent people. Throughout all of history, if you want to have a litmus test on any country, any region, look what is happening with the Jews there. We are the canaries. The Kuzari says Jews are like the heart in the body. The heart is very sensitive. It gets affected first by evil. When there's an infection, the heart becomes the chief target because of its centrality and its sensitivity. The Jews are the heart, and we are affected first. That's why God tells Moses, those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. It's not just a blessing or a prediction. It's also a historical statement. If you ever want to understand and ascertain the status of any country in history, look how they treat the Jews. If Jews are treated there with respect and dignity, with equality and rights, then their people are treated with respect and dignity. But where places that Jews are cursed, I can guarantee you those places are cursed not only for Jews, for their own people they're cursed. In Iran and Syria, it's not Jews who are loathed. In Gaza and among Hamas and Hezbollah, Jews are always the first. But how do they deal with their own dissidents? The amount of torture, the amount of abuse, the amount of deprivation, moral deprivation, and all other forms of deprivation, especially the abuse of life and human rights, are horrendous in all these countries. So God told Moses, here's the prediction of history, countries where you will be blessed. I promise you those countries will be blessed. They are blessed. It's hard sometimes for Jews to hear this. As you know, some people have a very hard time with those words. When Reagan called the Soviet Union the axis of evil, it was very, very hard for many of our brothers and sisters. Let's remember that socialism and communism, which was absolutely the evil empire. My parents grew up in Russia. I know what they went through, and I know what many other Russian Jews went through. But it's very hard for people to tolerate this. We want to make believe that it doesn't exist, but sadly it does exist. America has been and is a blessed country because of the fact of what is happening right here, right now in the United States of America, right here in this room, and in hundreds and hundreds and thousands of other rooms. And it's been this way for centuries. A place where Torah has grown, where Yiddishkeit has grown, where Jewish communities have grown materially, emotionally, and spiritually in extraordinary ways. This is not a time of fear, but it's a time of resolve, and it's a time of sobriety, and it's a time for courage, and it's a time for opening our eyes to all of the realities in their entire scope, both in the United States, of course, in Israel, where most of the Jewish people live today. 6.6 million Jews live today in Israel, Kenya, but you should not underestimate that number. 75 years after the nightmare of the Holocaust, that 6.6 million Jews live today in our eternal homeland in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel. But this is a time for Jewish leaders to be able to understand what our mission is, how we define our mission. And as all of you who are here, who have gracefully and courageously accepted upon yourself the duty and the responsibility not only to care for your own welfare, yourselves and your spouses and your children and your grandchildren and your homes and your businesses, which is always admirable, but to take part in the tremendous work of the Chabad ambassadors to your communities, your cities, your countries, your states, your campuses, and the centers that you have created, to shoulder with them partner and partner, to be able to look at the reality of the Jewish world today and to ask ourselves the question, what is our duty? What is our responsibility? What does God and Jewish history beacon to us today? This is one of those unique and extraordinary moments that I think ought to be looked at with great resolve and great courage. And I would like to use as a paradigm for the ideas I want to share with you in the following few minutes, probably the first story of anti-Semitism in Jewish history. Literally the first. I wish I could say the last, but it was only the first, it was not the last. It's sad, but that's the fact. What is the first story of anti-Semitism recorded in Jewish history? You know, it reminds me of the anecdote. They say that there was a Jew who was sitting in Central Park here in Manhattan, reading a newspaper Sunday morning, very nice, relaxed Sunday morning, drinking a latte, and reading, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal or some other newspaper and minding his own business. And some fellow, obviously somebody who didn't like Jews, comes over to him, punches him in the face. The Jew is astounded. He's astonished. Came from nowhere. And the man looks at him in the eyes and says, "This is a punch from Iran." Okay, the poor Jew is bleeding and quite wounded, but he continues, doesn't want to make a fight and a ruckus. 5 minutes later, the guy comes back, gives him a kick in his stomach, and then says, "A kick from Syria." 5 minutes later comes, smacks him in the face, and he says, "A smack from Hezbollah." 5 minutes later comes and gives him a punch in his back, a shove in his back, and he says, "This is a shove from Hamas." The poor Jew at this point is bleeding, he's black and blue, he's wounded, he's maimed. He gets up and he leaves, and this anti-Semite is quite content. Sits down, takes his coffee, takes his newspaper, got his seat, got rid of the Jew. The Jew comes back a half an hour later with a big wrench. Comes over to this fellow, knocks him over the head with the wrench with all of his might, and as the guy is about to go into a state of unconsciousness, the Jew tells him, "This is a wrench from Home Depot." And I remember this when I think about the first recorded event of Jewish anti-Semitism, and as far as my knowledge goes, it comes from the Torah, the opening of the book of Shmos, the book of Exodus, the biography of our greatest leader, Moses. The way the Torah says it is Moses grew up in a palace. He grew up in a wonderful palace. He had the best childhood. His stepmother was Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh. His step-grandfather was the Pharaoh, the king, the monarch of the superpower of the day. And he goes out of the palace and he goes out to his brothers. And what's the first scene that he observes? And this is the first vignette, the first story we know about Moses. The Torah says he sees an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew. A Jewish fellow, a slave, is being beaten to death by an Egyptian. This is what Moses observes. There's a helpless Jew who's being beaten to death by an Egyptian human being right in front of his eyes. What do you do at such a moment? So the Torah says, I'll quote, "Vayifin kai v'kai," he turned here, he turned there. "Vayar kiyenish," he saw there was nobody there. "Vayachas hamitzri," he struck the Egyptian. "Vayitmeneyu b'chayil," and then he hid him, he buried him in the sand. He struck the Egyptian dead, buried him, and saved the life of this helpless Jew who was being beaten to death. That's the end of the story. The next day, he will learn that people have seen him. They informed upon him to the Pharaoh. Moses is forced to flee Egypt and to escape, and he wouldn't return till a long time later as the great redeemer of the Jewish people. But that's later in the story. At this point, he saved one Jew from a barbaric, brutal, and bloody death by the hands of the Egyptian. Now, we Jews are notorious for many things. One of the things we're notorious for, and not in vain, is for knowing how to argue. This is an incredible Jewish trait. The whole culture of Judaism is based on argument. If you ever open up a Mishnah or a Talmud, the arguments never ever cease. But in Yiddish there's an expression, al tashir. Everything has to have some limit. Is there no limit to how often and frequent Jews will argue? Well, it seems that not. I myself once heard from the Rebbe, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, when was it, 1984, I think, out of Fabringen. The Rebbe had a wonderful sense of humor. And he said this publicly. Why is it that when a Jew meets another Jew, the greeting is Shalom Aleichem, and the response is always Aleichem Shalom, peace unto you peace. Shouldn't the response be reciprocal? I say Shalom Aleichem, you should say Shalom Aleichem. Just to illustrate his question, imagine I come to you and I say, good morning, and you say, morning good. How are you? You are how? What's up? Up what's? It's quite bizarre. Well, in Hebrew we do it all the time. Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. It should be Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. And the Rebbe's response was, because when two Jews meet, even before they start the conversation, the first thing is they have to get into an argument. So I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, and you respond, no. It's exact the opposite. Aleichem Shalom. Now, once we establish that we're in an argument, now we know that we're both Jewish, and we could continue the conversation, hopefully peacefully. But yet, everything has a limit. And yet, it seems that this doesn't have a limit. How do I know? You open up the Midrash. The Midrash is the oral commentary to the verses of the Hebrew Bible of the Torah. It's called Midrash Rabbah. And you open it up, and the sages have an argument. And what's their argument? How did Moses kill the Egyptian? They want to know how he killed the Egyptian. And I say, Ribono Shel Olam. This happened more than 3,300 years ago. Unfortunately, a lot of water has come under the bridge since then. Lots of such situations. Is it really so relevant to know exactly how Moses killed him? Baruch Hashem, he did the job, the Jew was saved. Let's go eat. As every Jewish holiday, they tried to kill us, we won, now time to eat. That's it. How, what, when, where? But no, the rabbis have to argue how Moses killed him. And of course, there are not two opinions, that would be too little. There are three opinions. The first opinion comes from a great rabbi by the name of Avyasar. Rav Avyasar says he killed him with his fist, his good old fist. Perhaps in the palace he took some martial arts lessons, Krav Maga, self-defense, or whatever it was. And Moses knew how to use his fist. He took his fist, he punched out the Egyptian. He didn't only punch him out, he killed him to save the Jew. That's one opinion. Okay, glat. Opinion number two in the Midrash is Magrefa Shaltit. He took a shovel filled with cement. The Jew, apparently the slave, was building. He was doing construction. That's what Pharaoh used the Jewish slaves for. Moses took the shovel filled with cement or plaster, and that is how he killed the Egyptian. And the majority of the rabbis say he killed him b'shem hamafirish. He killed the Egyptian by uttering God's ineffable name. God's Shem HaMefarish, God's transcendent, mysterious, secret name that is not exposed. Today we don't know what that name is, how to pronounce it. But Moses uttered that name, and that name had the spiritual electricity to snuff out the soul of this potential murderer, and he saved the Jew. Those are the three arguments. Most Jewish children who learn in yeshiva know the third opinion because Rashi, the great biblical commentator, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, brings the third interpretation, which is Moses killed him through God's name, Halahargeni Ata Omer, as he interprets that verse. And I ask you today, my dearest friends, dear holy brothers from across the globe, as we say in Talmudic language, Lamai Nafkamina, what is the relevance of this argument? Do we have to argue about everything? Why is it relevant? And the rabbis lived 1,500 years after Moses. More than 1,500 years later, are they arguing how Moses killed him? What's the difference? What's the relevance? It's like we have to make an argument out of everything. Just let it go. Let it go. The Torah doesn't say how. Let it go. But perhaps, my friends, this argument is no small argument. It's an argument that lingers throughout all of Jewish history. Until this very time, as we stand here today, 2018, here in New York, centuries later, millennia later, in a different milieu, in a different climate, in a different region of the world, but the question still lingers. How did Moses do the job? It's not just a technical question. It's a profound, hashkafic question of perspective. When a Jew goes out to the world and sees an Egyptian, or any person, could be an American, ruthless, brutal anti-Semite who hates Jews and could do nothing better with his time than come into a synagogue Shabbos morning, gun down 11 people, including a 97-year-old Holocaust survivor, and shout and scream, all Jews must die. In other words, it's not these 11 I'm targeting. These 11 are just the representatives of all of Klal Yisrael, of all of the Jewish people. This is what ought to happen, heaven forbid, to every single Jew. So the Midrash is asking a question. Moses observed this in Egypt. He observed this with one. He saved the Jew. What is the method? What is the call of the Jewish people? What are we supposed to do? What ought to be our response throughout the generations to such heinous, evil, immoral, grotesque behavior? What is the right call for action? Ooh, this, to say bluntly, has divided the Jewish community for many, many years. This is not a simple question and not a simple answer. There have been three very different streams of thought, sometimes overlapping, sometimes deeply opposing each other, sometimes working together, but very often in complete opposition to each other. This answer to this question is something that if you'll study Jewish history, particularly in the last century or last 150 years, you will suddenly see how the debate of the rabbis in the Midrash is not an ancient debate about something that happened almost 3.5 millennia ago. It's one of the most contemporary debates that exist till this very day, that Jews had even this week. What are the three perspectives? One perspective is Moses killed the Egyptian with his fist. With his fist. This is one response. This response is, to put it in the words of the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin, Haba lahargach, hashkem lahargo. Somebody who comes to kill you, says the Talmud, kill him first. This is sound, moral, Torah advice and a commandment. You won't be helping humanity by tying your hands around the back and smiling to this person and saying, I'm such a nice guy, I'm handsome and I'm smart and I'm good looking and I'm kind. Why don't we talk it out? Hitler wasn't defeated by Churchill sending him a bouquet of roses. And Stalin, the Cold War, wasn't defeated by Reagan sending the Stalinist regime and his successors poems. Or by offering brutal anti-Semites to get some anger management therapy in Los Angeles clinics. We wish it could be that easy. Sometimes the Talmud says, when somebody comes to kill you, kill him first. That's what the fist represents. Moses, according to this opinion, was teaching the Jewish people. Sometimes it's painful, but sometimes Jews have to fight. They have to pick up their fist and protect themselves and their children. Sometimes when there is immoral violence, you have to engage in moral violence. It would be romantic and beautiful if we could never engage in that. Just spew words of love and affection and prose, and all the evil in the world will be eliminated. But sadly, till Mashiach comes speedily in our days, there are moments, Moses says, you have to learn how to use your fist. You can't be apologetic that you exist. You can't be apologetic that your children have a right to exist. You can't be apologetic over the fact that you have a right to defend yourself. You must be decisive. You must be ferocious. You have to have clear definitions and goals, know who you're facing, and stand up to such types of people with absolute decisiveness and clarity, and sometimes brute force simply to stop the immoral violence. After the first Gulf War in 1991, Bush the father, I was watching an interview with General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the general leading the American troops in Baghdad and Iraq. And the interviewer, a journalist, said, General Schwarzkopf, I have a question. Should we forgive terrorists? And Schwarzkopf said, that's God's job. Our job is to arrange the meeting. This is called straight thinking. Our job sometimes is to arrange the meeting. In many ways, you could say, many Jews who lived in Israel, many Jews who conceived of Israel in the last century, this was something many of them focused on very, very strongly, the fist. But there's another philosophy, and I would say this philosophy is embodied best by the American Jewish community, and I speak, of course, in generalities. And that is, they said, forget the fist, let's get the shovel. What does the shovel represent? The shovel represents construction. Our job is construction. Let's build, let's take cement, quote unquote, and build powerful infrastructures, powerful alliances, diplomatic connections. Let's build powerful communities, powerful wealth, powerful connections, powerful lobbying. Let's build ourselves up into financial powerhouses that have financial and political powerhouses. From this came the American Jewish community's dream of creating communities that are so powerful that they have influence in the humanities and in the arts and on Wall Street and in Washington and in the Capitol Hill and in journalism and in universities. Let's build powerful political, financial alliances that will allow us diplomatically to be able to yield influence and curb anti-Semitism and crush the ugly head of Jew hatred wherever it rises in America or around the world. And thus the vision of institutions like AIPAC and the World Jewish Congress and another hundreds of organizations that I'm not going to enumerate now, and the almost 400 JCCs around the United States of America, which all have this common goal of building a strong cultural community with strong influence, with strong relations, with powerful alliances, with great diplomatic ties between people, Jews and Gentiles of influence. Let Jews become powerful in every industry where they live within the secular culture, and that's how Jews can yield influence. Let's take our shovels and build skyscrapers, literally build skyscrapers of influence. And when you're on the top of the skyscraper, you can yield, you can have a vision that will help you influence people around the world to be able to see your cause and help you defend your cause. That was a second vision, the vision of the shovel. Many of them very uncomfortable with the fist. Their point of view is always diplomacy, always conversation, always see the other side, always compromise. And then there's a third vision. And the third vision comes in the third opinion. How did Moses kill the Egyptian? Not with his fist and not with a shovel. He did it b'shem ha-mefarish, which is God's name. What is that all about? Well, the third vision argues, and this, I'm sure you can all guess, was and is represented by what people will call the religious Jewish community, the Torah community in America and Israel and the world over. And their philosophy has always been, the fist is great, the shovel is great, but the way to stand up to the Egyptian is through the divine name. Their argument has always been, what allowed the Jewish people to survive over 3.5 millennia through thick and thin? Was it only a shovel and a fist? It was our connection with Hashem through Torah and through mitzvahs. Their argument was, look at Egypt, look at ancient Assyria, Babylonia, Rome, Greece, etc., etc. They had greater fists, they had greater shovels. They built massive empires, but where are they? Where's Pharaoh? Where's Nebuchadnezzar? Where's Sancheriv? Where's the Persian Empire? Where's the Greek Empire? Where's Titus, Vespasian, Caligula, Adrian, Tiberius? Where are they? Where's Turcomedes? Where's Khmelnytsky? Where's Rosenberg and Eichmann and Himmler and Goebbels? Where are they? And the answer is in Wikipedia. And we are the Jewish people. And the answer is we created Wikipedia. And as I'm speaking, you can edit any of them in your Wikipedia entry. You could take out Pharaoh and you could do some edits on Pharaoh. You could take out Antiochus and edit him a little bit. We sit here 2018 and we edit these mighty, mighty monarchs or powerhouses or military commanders who almost ruled the world. But it's not only we survived them, That wasn't enough for us. We wanted to even transform the experience. So we took Antiochus and we turned him into a Chanukah latke. And we took Haman and we turned him into a Hamantash. And we took Pharaoh and we turned him into a matzah ball. We don't only want to defeat them, we want to eat them. We want to add to our cholesterol and our weight and our comfort. We're going to create healthy Hamantashim from you, Haman. You're going to become a sweet delicacy for Purim. Last year, Chanukah, I was speaking near Brooklyn College. The president wanted to know, why do Jews eat so many latkes and donuts on Chanukah? Like, why? Wasn't a Jewish woman, and I needed a simple explanation. So what do I say? I said, it's very simple. Chanukah represents the victory of the Jews over the Greeks. The Greeks were into 4 things: looks, fashion, athleticism, exercise. So we eat Chanukah, latkes and donuts, ad infinitum, to make sure we will never, ever, ever look like them. We want to underscore the absolute victory. So this argument was that ultimately the power of the Jewish people, what Moses was teaching the Jews is, you want to defeat those anti-Semitism, what you need is your relationship with God. Your relationship with Torah, your relationship with mitzvahs. 3 opinions, and as I said, sadly, the 3 opinions often fought each other, disagreed with each other. I don't want to say always backstabbed each other, but sometimes backstabbed each other, but certainly couldn't make peace. Perhaps, I think, in our generation, one of our greatest moments and opportunities, and I think this is part of the purpose and part of the mission of each and every one of you sitting in this room, is once and for all to converge all 3, to synchronize all 3, to discover once and for all, as the Talmud always likes to say, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. This opinion and this opinion are all the words of the living God. Each one of them is vital and critical in our mission as Jews. Each one of them. They are not contradictory. Ultimately, they must complement each other. There are moments, Torah says, we must use a fist. No Jew in your community should ever apologize for Jews defending themselves in every single possible way. Nobody should come to Israel or come to the Jewish people and say, the United Nations will take care of you. When 1.5 million children were marched into gas chambers, who took care? Nobody uttered a pips. And it's not just Jews. 400,000 people were murdered in Syria. How often do you read about it? If a missile veers off from Israel into Gaza by mistake and kills 2 children, there's an immediate United Nations condemnation. When was the last condemnation you heard about 400,000 people killed in Syria by their own government? And never mind Sudan, and never mind the Congo, and never mind Rwanda. And everyone goes to sleep. Suddenly when it comes to Jews, we should just ignore. Jews need to use a fist. Jews need to worry about their security. I don't think it's a time of fear, but it's a time of conscientious sobriety of possible threats that could threaten the Jewish people. Wherever it is, there are crazy, heinous, immoral people who hate Jews. And at this time of the year, we always remember the great Chabad ambassadors to Mumbai, India, gunned down in their Chabad house. Which is why, this is not my topic today, I'm not going to elaborate, but I think every Jewish school with children, every Jewish shul where shuls gather, every Jewish community center has to realize the times we live in and not stick their head in sand. We never speak negatively. We always pray and hope for the positive. But I'm just going to say this. God forbid it should never ever come to this. But if God forbid another Jewish place is attacked, everybody will be scratching their head. Why didn't we learn from Pittsburgh? That day should never happen and never come. But naturally, God tells us, I'm here for you, but you got to learn how to use a fist. Whatever that means in modern vernacular. I don't mean we should all be standing with fists, but I'm talking about security on every level. But there's another idea, and that's the idea of the shovel. Ein soimchin al hanes, the Talmud says. We don't only rely on miracles. Jews need to build strong alliances. We need to use our influence with our friends and our foes alike. We need to create powerful connections and relationships on every level. That is a vision that the Torah warrants, that the Torah invites. Yes, every Jew needs to use his or her influence, and those of you who have God blessed with the resources and the talents, don't duck. The world admires Jews who admire Judaism. The world respects Jews who respect Judaism. The world will love Jews who stand up for the Jewish people, stand up for the Jewish land, stand up for the Jewish faith, stand up for the Jewish heritage. They are embarrassed and ashamed by Jews who are embarrassed with themselves, who duck, who are meek, who are afraid to say boo and to stand out. I think it was Dr. Twersky tells the story that he was on an airplane, dressed in a Hasidic garb, big round black hat, square white beard, long black coat. And a Jewish lady turns to him and speaks in Yiddish. And she says, "Du bist a Schande, you're a disgrace. Anti-Semitism happens because of you. If you would only dress normal and be integrated, everybody would love us." And Dr. Twersky looks at her and in perfect Oxford English, he says, "I fail to comprehend the dialect of your verbiage. Which language are you speaking?" And she says, "Yiddish." He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I am Amish." So she says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were Hasidic." He says, "No, that's so kind. I'm Amish." And he Amish had to look, the square beard, the real round Hasidic black hat, right? Not the Lubavitch Chicago Borsellino, but the real nice black hat, the long black coat. He had it. And he says, "I'm Amish." He says, oh, I love the Amish, he says. He says, "Wow, that's so nice. Why do you love the Amish?" And she says, "Because you're a minority, but you maintain your heritage with such dignity and such pride. Kudos unto you." It was his turn to respond in Yiddish. And he says, "Aha, oi ich wollt gewen Amish, hast du mich lieb. Jetzt, dass ich bin a Yid, hast du mich feind. If I would have been Amish, you'd love me. Now that I'm Jewish, you're embarrassed by me. I want to bless you. You should be able to cherish in your own that which you cherish in others." Well, guess what? The 11 Jews in the tree of life did not look Amish, nor did they look Hasidic. But the Jew hater doesn't distinguish. He doesn't distinguish. Just like Hitler didn't distinguish if you were a right-winger, a left-winger, an atheist, a communist, an agnostic, a believer, orthodox, ultra-orthodox, conservadox, ultra-orthodox, fundamentalist. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And therefore the Torah says we need a shovel. We need to construct and employ every possible influence that we have in order to strengthen security, to strengthen identity, to change the climate, to influence opinion, to mold education, to mold the youth. And then there is finally the third opinion of the Midrash. And the third opinion is God's name. And needless to say at this conference, that is essentially the fuel behind the first two, and of course the third. That the greatest power that the Jewish people had since the day we stood at Sinai until this very day, the power that no other great empire or civilization had, which is why they're gone today, that the Jewish people had, was and is Yiddishkeit. The Torah and the mitzvahs that Jews celebrated, observed, learned and taught, bequeathed to their children and their communities through thick and thin, in good times and bad times, in times of exhilaration and times of sadness, in climates of prosperity and in climates of oppression, in the East and in the West, in the North and the South, for 3,300 years, the one common denominator that accompanies Jewish history from the day our feet stood at Sinai until this very day, as we sit here right now in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, New York, is the connection with the divine name, with the divine reality, with the Torah and the mitzvahs that Jews sacrificed themselves. Jewish mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers sacrificed and gave their blood, sweat, and tears and joy and laughter to give over to their children and grandchildren. And hence today we could look back and say, as the verse says in Deuteronomy, Va'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. You who cleave unto God remain alive, eternally alive. The prophet Malachi, the last prophet of the Jewish people is the prophet Malachi. And he says, Ani Hashem lo shanisi va'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilisa. I, God, have not been obliterated. I have not changed. You will not be obliterated. As long as you remain connected to the divine, you will never, ever be obliterated. Am Yisrael Chai. So therefore, the third opinion is the essence, the backbone of Jewish history. But our responsibility today is to show the synchronization of all three opinions, because the same God who wants us to pray, and the same God who wants us to worship, and the same God who wants us to do the mitzvahs and to learn Torah and to teach Torah is the same God who says, he who comes to kill you, kill him first, use your fist. And the same God who says, don't rely on miracles, and dinah de malchusa dinah, and build strong and powerful alliances and use your influence in every single possible way to protect good people, to protect the Jewish people the world over. And the truth is, not only are the three not contradictory, the three are really all the same. A lovely Hasidic interpretation, Vayitmenehu b'choil. Moses hides him in the sand. The word b'chol also means in the mundane. Moses uttered God's name, but vayitmenehu, he hid it in the mundane. Nobody knew it was God's name. It sounded mundane. The first two interpretations seem like mundane, but really they are an expression of God's name as well. When a Jew uses his fist, when a Jew uses his shovel, it's another manifestation of God's name. It's all one. The same God who works miracles is the God who works through nature. The three are never a contradiction. My dearest friends, there was a number of years ago, there was a Jewish fellow. He's a Yemenite Jew. He lives in Israel. He's in his 80s today. His name is Shalom. His last name is Nagar. He grew up in Yemen and then made Aliyah to Israel. In 1962, he was the one in charge on securing Adolf Eichmann in his prison cell, executing him and cremating him. As you know, in 1961, Israel abducted Eichmann from the streets of Argentina. They just recently made a film about it. And Shalom Nagar was the man who watched him. He was in charge of the security and actually hung him and then burnt him. And they scattered his ashes 3 kilometers into the Mediterranean. They didn't want to have it in Israel's territory, so they brought it to international waters. Now, for many years, his name was hidden because they were afraid of the revenge of neo-Nazis. But recently, a number of years ago, they released his name. So I saw one of the German TV networks asked Mr. Nagar if they could do an interview with him about Eichmann's last days. And he said yes. Where can we do the interview? We have a studio in Tel Aviv, a beautiful studio. And he said no. He learns in Kollel every day. He's an older Jew, but he sits and learns Torah most of the day in his neighborhood in Israel. He says, come to my Kollel, where I study, and you'll interview me there. Now, you know, the Germans in Yiddish, they call them yekes. You know what yekes are? They like things clean and neat. If you ever go to a Jewish Kollel, maybe not in your community, but in that particular community, it's a very nice place, but it's not so kempt, let's put it that way. You can never find what you're looking for. If there's coffee, there's no spoons. If there's spoons, there's no cups. If there's cups, there's no sugar. If there's sugar, there's no milk. If there's milk, there's no coffee. If there's coffee, there's no hot water, etc. If there's hot water, 2 people are fighting. But it's never as I can. And then it's a kola, right? So people are always arguing, because Jews argue, as we said before. So they're arguing and debating. And then one guy decided it's his home, so he has an apartment in the kollel. And then another person is doing yard site for his great-grandmother's mother-in-law, so he brings herring and spinach, and another person says, this is my seat. Another person is starting a minyan, finishing a minyan, in the middle of a minyan. Then there's an argument, then this one is trying to give a class, this one is finishing a class. There's a homeless guy who decided this is his place and he's under the table, etc., etc. They decide what should be the future with global warming. I mean, these are important places. So it's not a place for a German nice TV crew to do an interview. And they ask him if he could come to their studio. It's a beautiful, large, spacious studio in Tel Aviv overlooking the ocean. He says, absolutely not. It's here or nowhere. They had no choice, so they interviewed Shalom Kenagar. So I was reading the interview that they did with him. It was a very interesting interview. And they asked him about Eichmann and how security was. And he describes to them how tight the security was because Israel was frightened that somebody, especially a Holocaust survivor, is going to kill him before the trial finishes. And it was very important for them to show the world that they're putting Eichmann, the monster, the architect of the final solution, on trial. And he says he was behind 5 chambers, and each chamber had security, and he was in charge. And he said all the food that Eichmann ate, he had to eat first, because they were afraid that somebody's going to poison the food. And he asked the head of the Mossad, it doesn't make sense, because if the food has poison in it, then I'm going to die. And the head of the Mossad told him, well, listen, for you, I got a replacement. But for Eichmann, I don't got a replacement. I mean, that's how worried and cautious, conscientious they were with this great criminal. Ultimately, the trial ended, and he describes the end, and he actually hung him. And he remained unrepentant. His last words were, long live Germany and hail. I'm not going to finish the sentence. I don't think a Jew should say it, but hail the Führer. And he remained the same vicious murderer responsible, one of the main people responsible for the death of 6 million of our brothers and sisters. And he hung him, and he cremated him, and distributed his ashes, and so forth. And he just described the whole story in great detail, and it was quite fascinating just to read. And at the end, the German interviewers say, we have one last question. Why would you not go to our studio in Tel Aviv for the interview? Why did you stubbornly insist to remain here in this kollel? And the man responded, and I have to tell you, my heart quelled and swelled with nachas, as this Yemenite Jew, who probably doesn't even know much about the Holocaust, has his long, cute, curly payas, speaks in a real Yemenite accent, has the darker complexion, speaks to them, and he says, listen, guys, I'll tell you why. I imagine that this interview would be watched by millions and millions and millions of Germans. I wanted to show them something. I wanted to show them that it's not only that the Jewish body survived. I wanted to show them that the Jewish culture and soul and faith survived. You know that the Jews survived, but I wanted to take you in there and show you all the torn books. And you didn't like that the books were torn, but the reason these books are torn is because they're being used. And I wanted to show you that there are arguments. And I wanted to show you that the Torah is alive. You should know that the Torah survived because when the Germans killed the Jews, they didn't only want to kill their body. They wanted to kill their spirit, their soul, their heritage, their faith. They wanted to destroy Jewish tradition. That famous moment in Lublin. Lublin had the greatest yeshiva, one of the greatest yeshivas in Eastern Europe. It still exists, the building. If you ever go to Lublin, Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. And it had the greatest library of a yeshiva in all of Eastern Europe. I think some 25,000 books in the 1920s and 30s. And they made the Jews build a fire in the courtyard of the yeshiva and throw in all of those books into the fire in order to be able to add insult to injury, to watch their own sacred books be burnt. And there's that story that they say, that they told them, don't only throw the books in, now it's time to dance. Let them dance, just to torture, just to squeeze the last ounce of pride and dignity. And one of the Jews then took the lyrics of an old Yiddish romantic song. I don't know how many of you know Yiddish romantic songs, but one of them is, basically, a husband and a wife get into a fight. And she starts giving him the treatment that some Jewish wives give their husbands, present company excluded, which is ignoring him. He doesn't exist. Now, it's the worst thing you could do to a husband. I don't have to tell this to you, but it's the worst thing you do to a husband. Make believe he doesn't exist, right? It's that pent-up anger that your wife has towards you, probably when you get home. I'm just joking. God forbid. But I'm sure you'll call her a few times and you'll buy a beautiful New York gift and everything will be good. And you'll tell her how much you missed her. However, as this is happening, he composes a song, and the song is, let's not keep a grudge against each other. Let's just talk it out and become friends again. It's a very cute Yiddish song. This Jew converted the lyrics. Instead of Let's appease each other. Master of the universe, we will outlive them. And as the books are being burnt, the Jews are dancing. The SS can't understand why the Jews are excited about their dance. It takes them time to get the Yiddish and realize the meaning of the words. We're going to outlive them. So back to Shalom Kenagar, he tells the German TV crew, he says, I wanted to show you that the Torah is alive, the books are alive, the conversation is alive, the celebration of Jewish life is alive, the celebration of Jewish faith, of history is alive right here. That's why I wanted to interview here. Nobody would have seen it in the studio. And with that, they finished the interview. And indeed, friends, that remains the third perspective in the Midrash. As you go home, as all of us go home, to your communities, to your sphere of influence, with your partners, the shluchim, who you have partnered with to build Jewish life, to secure Jewish life, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, to create the greatest renaissance of Jewish life following the greatest destruction of Jewish life, to create the rejuvenation, as in J-E-W, rejuvenation, I just respelled it, but to create the greatest rejuvenation of Jewish life in your spheres, in your regions, in your countries, states, communities, campuses, wherever you are, with the shluchim. I believe that today, at these fateful moments of Jewish history, when things are happening very, very fast, very, very swiftly, very, very fast, every day is a new development. Things are moving extremely fast. These are heightened times of loaded energy, but always heightened times of tremendous titanic opportunity, no pun intended. And it's our vision and your work and vision and purpose and goal to be able to once and for all synchronize the three great views of the Midrash. What is the role of the Jewish people in sometimes a difficult and hostile and blessed and prosperous and sometimes challenging environment? This is a time where if we look at Jewish history, we are meriting blessings that we never had before. There are opportunities today that never existed before. And there are also great challenges today that worry us. These are the moments before Mashiach, and at such moments, it's time for us to synchronize these three visions as you articulate your goals for the next year and for the future, to be able once and for all to make peace between these three perspectives, for the Jewish people to know that sometimes we need a fist and never to be apologetic about it. For the Jewish people to know that the world wants to hear our voices and to be able to see our influence and not to shy away from it, to build it stronger and deeper and stronger Jewish communities should be as strong, as beautiful, as powerful as ever. And number three, the fuel and the gas that will sustain forever these first two visions is, as Yiddishkeit, Judaism will continue to grow and blossom in your communities with your help and your support on every level, financially, emotionally, socially, psychologically, spiritually, with your heart and your soul, with your wallets and your contributions, with your dedication and your love, with your partnership together with the shluchim in your places. You'll bring in more and more people, young and old, women, men, and children. You will build God's name. You will build the Shem HaMeforish in the most powerful way. And then we know for sure that not only will Jews survive and thrive, but that the eternity of the Jewish people is then guaranteed until the great day when indeed the world will be filled with divine awareness, and peace and security will reign in Israel and in the whole world with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. Thank you so much.
Click subscribe to see more exclusive content for the most sought-after Jewish speakers, teachers, and thinkers.